Deer Hunter Podcast, a platform created to entertain, educate, and evolve the modern day deer hunter. So we'll do it first thing right here at the beginning. We got a bucket with all the names for everybody that entered. And if you entered 2 times, then your name's in here twice. And if you entered 3 times, then your name's in here 3 times. So, do you want to pick it?
Yeah, I'll pick it.
Here, hold on. I'm going to stir them up a little bit more.
Alrighty.
My wife was kind enough to write all these out.
Should I do a couple practice picks? Just pick a couple names
I
and read
kind
them
of
all?
wanted to do that. But here. All right. Exodus
Alright.
Trail Camera giveaway winner is
Josh Novilla.
Newville.
Newville.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, those are
We were driving down a dirt road when Shannon was writing those out.
All right.
Josh Newville, good deal. He's been listening since the beginning, so glad to see that he won the camera. And Josh, when you hear this, just reach out to me and get me your address, and we're sending you a new Exodus Lift 2 trail camera. So
Yeah, I want to say the response was overwhelming, too. I mean, a lot of people entered and shared and whatnot, so really appreciate all the feedback and entries and everything.
yeah, it was super fun. I had more interaction this week with listeners than we have.
Right.
And I know you're running the Facebook page as well as I am, so just depending on who gets to it
Right,
first to look
right.
on there and see who's communicating. But yeah, it was cool. I was in contact with another company today, and I think we're going to do something similar with an archery product here in the near future. So
Cool.
yeah, so we'll get to our program here. Enjoy the podcast that we did a couple weeks ago with Dan Infalt.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks again. What time did we get to your house this morning?
About 5.
5 a.m.
Yeah, somewhere right around there.
Did you pay attention to what time we left?
I think it was about 11:30.
11:30. I'm feeling pretty good, actually.
You look rough.
Thanks. Well, I got an hour of sleep. So we're up, we're recording, we're sitting in the middle of the woods with Dan Infalt. Alex Slosser.
Yep.
Traveled over we left. Worked all day yesterday. Got in the truck, drove through the night. You got some sleep. Got
Yep.
to Dan's house this morning at, what time did you say?
5.
5?
Yep.
And then we drove, 2 hours north?
Oh, more than that. I think we drove about 3.5 hours north from my place.
So I slept in the back of the truck for an hour, and you drove us up, and we've been...
I don't know. It might have been more like 2 hours.
Was it?
Yeah, you were
Yeah.
out for a while.
Yeah. I
Well,
needed
he
it.
almost woke up when you were messing with him.
Yeah.
You were messing with me? Yes, we've been out baiting bear. I've never done this before. All my friends bear hunt, like I was saying earlier, but I've never, I don't know, I just never have had the time or the opportunity. It's been interesting. Learned a lot of stuff. I've never heard you talk about bear hunting before. I didn't even know,
Yeah, it's a big passion of mine. It's just that I don't have as many bear followers as I do deer followers. Just not as many people bear hunt or are into it.
but you're pretty serious about it. You really look forward to it, huh?
Yeah.
I gotta imagine too, like this is an opportunity for you to, when you're out in the woods, you're looking for deer sign too, right? You're not
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
or are you kind of gung ho on your bear missions? And
I probably shouldn't say this because you're going to get 800 emails, people asking you where, but the bear bait buck everybody always asks me about, you got to see the spot. There's
Yeah.
not too many people I'd show that to. So
Yeah.
I must trust you or something.
yeah,
Well, hopefully we'll make it back to Michigan now and not. Dan will drop us off in the middle of nowhere.
yeah, no kidding.
I saw you GPS in trees by the bear bait buck.
Oh yeah, you probably thought that's what I was doing. Yeah, I was responding to some text to my wife that my son wasn't behaving, but there's not a whole lot I can do about that. We're in northern Wisconsin. She's back in Michigan, but Yeah, I appreciate you doing this. It's cool. We hooked up through a somewhat mutual friend now,
Yeah.
and I want to talk about deer hunting. But I guess before we get into deer hunting, we want to just, for the few people that might listen to this, just give a little rundown of who you are and what you do and why we're sitting here doing this today.
Okay. I'm Dan Infalt. I run thehuntbeast.com, which is a forum where people discuss hunting tactics. And I make hunting DVDs that are a little different than what people think of as hunting DVDs. They're really go in depth about tactics, and it's a little less of the bragging, showing off what you shot, and just a documentation of hunts like everybody else has. This is really a start to finish method of hunting that I've been perfecting over the years and through input from others and myself and observations. I got a presence on Facebook, and I got a really good YouTube site that I've got a lot of free videos on there that are really cool. I know you've seen some of them.
Yeah, I love them.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're, like you said, they're different. It's a ton of information. It's not wasted time. It's not, I mean, it's entertaining at the same time, but I can watch them and rewatch them, and I like them more because the education that I gain from them and take away, it's not just garbage that I'm consuming to waste time. And it's just, it honestly, when I was watching, what was the one I just told you that I watched, that is it
Chasing a Dream.
Chasing a Dream, which is about an hour-long video, and it has everything that I want in a hunting video and nothing that I don't. It's just you out in the woods hunting, the sounds of nature, no music that accelerates when the deer's coming in, and I don't want to hear that. When I want to hear the sounds of the woods and get some good information and know what you're doing. So I've really come to enjoy them.
Yeah, I like that video because it's good representative of what I believe in. I mean, it's me going out on a piece of property and in a swamp and hunting down a buck that's in there, and dealing with rumors of bucks that are supposed to be in the area and whether or not I should go after that or go after one of the other bucks I'm seeing. And it shows my methodology and my thought process for how I pick spots and how I move and how I keep mobile and how I ultimately got it done in the end.
Yeah. And people get to see you in your underwear.
Yeah.
And
That's probably the biggest comment I get out of that video.
yeah. Yeah, I won't do a spoiler for anybody that hasn't watched it, but I lost my train of thought on what I was going to say about that. But when did you start the hunting beast?
Geez, I think it was about 2006.
Okay, so 10 years.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, 10, 11 years.
And you don't have to give up your age if you don't want to, but when did you start hunting?
I started hunting when I was around 9, I think. 8 or 9, yeah.
That would have been what year?
Oh,
roughly?
Geez, that's way back in the 70s.
So you've seen some eras of deer hunting
Yeah.
come and go and got to witness a lot of stuff. I'm fascinated by like the history of hunting. More and more I'm kind of gravitating towards reading back into kind of how we got here now to this present day. You know, everything's pretty fast paced, shared on social media, but it wasn't like that back then. People hunted because they loved to hunt, and that still is why they do. But what drew you to it at a young age? Was it a family ordeal where that you got into it, or was it something that you took on your own?
Well, I took it on my own, and I loved hunting from an early age and loved the idea of it. I had an older brother who hunted quite a bit, but he came actually up where we're at now. He'd travel up here and hunt in the big woods of northern Wisconsin, and I didn't get to go with him, and I was too young, and he moved out of state, and but I wanted to hunt and started hunting around the backyard, and it was a lot about getting food for the family and being proud of that. it was a different time. I mean, I don't think anybody's starving nowadays, but back then you didn't get the handouts you do now,
Right.
and it was rough making it back then. And my dad worked 2 jobs so that we wouldn't have to live in the city, so he could afford a house out in the country. And we really looked forward to deer meat and stuff. I had a trap line, and we actually ate the animals I trapped too. Not only did I sell the furs, but we'd eat muskrats and raccoons and all that stuff that nowadays people look at you like you're nuts.
Beaver.
Oh yeah.
I heard beaver's excellent.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Is
It's
it?
good stuff.
That's what I heard. I heard a
It's
beaver.
like beef.
That's what I heard.
Mhm.
If you do like a pot roast style beaver, that's just amazing.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
What was the worst of them that you
The
had to
worst,
eat?
the worst thing I ever ate that came from the land was when my dad he worked with a gentleman from a different country who had all kinds of weird recipes and told him how great fish soup is and gave him a recipe for fish soup, and he made a soup out of a northern I caught, and it was the grossest thing I ever
Oh.
ate in my life.
Mm.
And that's got to be over 40 years ago, and I could still taste it.
What, did it leave the skin on and everything?
Ah,
or
it
what?
just tastes like raw fish.
Ugh.
That's no good. Yeah, venison's much better than that.
Yeah, yeah.
So, when you were hunting, it was probably any method. It was all in, right? Like bow, gun, whatever. Or were you primarily bow hunting or gun hunting?
Well, I bow hunted mostly because that had the longer season. But
Okay.
I bow hunted, I gun hunted, I small gamed. But my passion always brought me back to deer. Deer was the big thing. And like most, at first it was about killing a deer. Then it was about killing a buck. And then it was about killing a bigger buck. And there was a time period when I changed and went into wanting to shoot giant bucks, which was kind of not even talked about back in those days. And then I was kind of at odds with my dad because he wanted me to keep bringing meat home, and I managed to kill deer every year. I don't think there's ever been a year in my life that I didn't kill some deer, but I killed less, and it was harder when I upped the odds. And a lot of people knock trophy hunters and guys that go after big bucks, but if you get real good at killing stuff, the next step is obviously to hold out for something bigger and make the challenge greater. It's no different than a guy going to a recurve bow because it's too easy with a compound, or going to bow hunting over rifle.
Do you gun hunt still?
Yeah, I like gun hunting.
I figured
It's
you
a
did.
whole different world than bow hunting,
Yeah.
but I like it. And I gun hunt different than most people. I really like figuring out where they're bedding and sneaking in their bedding areas and shooting them at their beds if I'm hunting solo, or I like driving them. And we do drives in little bedding areas where I know where big bucks are holed up.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because I don't know if it's the sexy thing or what, but almost all the deer hunting talk nowadays is about bow hunting. And myself personally, I love to bow hunt, but I love to gun hunt too. So you say you have a little different approach.
Yeah, bow hunting is a personal thing, and even when you go with buddies, you split off and you're on your own. It's a solo thing between you and the deer, like a chess match. And gun hunting for me, especially nowadays, has become more of a social event where you get together with your buddies and stuff and do some things. And it's getting more and more like that. And I guess part of that's because I'm not as concerned about killing huge bucks anymore. I'm just as happy to see one of my buddies kill a good buck. But for me, the gun hunting, I've kind of perfected it in my area where I'm killing some pretty good bucks in the public land over there in gun season pretty regularly.
Now, do you use like intel you got from spring scouting or like from bow season to pinpoint on where you're gonna go in, drive, or sneak up on one? Or
Well, a
bed?
little of both.
Mhm.
We were talking about that in the drive up here. That buck that my son shot, that was a pretty good buck, and that one I was playing cat and mouse with him with a bow, and my
Go ahead. I'll fix that.
son was gonna go gun hunting with us, and he hadn't hunted with us in a while.
Uh-huh.
And it was actually my wife was on my case about it. You better make sure he gets a deer so he sticks with this.
Yeah.
So I said, well, I'll put him on that big one. We'll see if he can hit it.
Uh-huh.
And I jumped that deer right. I knew where he was bedding. He was bedding, it's like 10 yards from the parking lot. I mean, he's
Really?
bedding right next to all the people parked for gun season. There was probably,
Don't worry, I'll edit that out. It just keep playing in this podcast. Oh, jeez. Go back and listen to it all.
There we go. We're back on. That was all right. Technical difficulty. We're back from. I'll just explain it, I guess, for anybody listening, what we're looking at right now. We have a couple 5-gallon buckets set up in the middle of a 2-track with some electronic equipment sitting on it, with an extension cord plugged into an inverter that's hooked up to a car battery running the entire podcast. And apparently we had a bad battery, so now we got a set of jumper cables on that battery to the battery in the truck, and we're back up and running.
all right.
Have you had a podcast set up like this before?
Never.
I didn't think so. Okay, so where were we at?
How do you pinpoint the areas you're gonna drive or sneak up on them in the bed, Dan? Is that?
Well, the ones I sneak up on are bedding areas that I know of that I really don't want to take anybody else to, or a specific buck I'm targeting. And, I'll think about, I know that they're looking downwind. So you can't come from straight into the wind or they're going to spot you or whatever. So I come in on a crosswind, and I just try to get as close as I can slow before they jump. And I try to keep myself in a position that I can shoot from,
Okay.
I've done quite well with that, and a couple of my biggest bucks came from sneaking up on them in their beds. The best hunt that I got one buck that was in the upper 180s that I knew where he was bedding, and I crawled up to him with a gun bungeed to my back through marsh, water, and grass, and popped up. And the funny thing is, I never had the balls to do that with a bow, and I shot him at 10 yards sitting in his bed. I could have used a bow if I wanted to.
Was that the one that was like under a willow?
Yeah.
Really bedding under a willow?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, now what were you saying about the one your son got on that drive?
That one, I was playing cat and mouse with that buck during the bow season. I hunted him about 3 times, which is way over hunting it to me. But he was bedding about 10 yards from the public parking lot. And we went out there opening day of gun season, and there was probably 10, 15, maybe even 20 cars parked there. Jeez. And I put him on a step ladder, sitting on the top of it, in the Cattails, where I figured the deer would escape to. And I went to the parking lot, and I didn't get about 10 steps out of the parking lot and jumped him, and the kid hit him, and it was a little worrisome because the buck kept running and the whole woods was full of orange.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of guys in there, and that was a 160s class buck. And so we circled the woods it ran into, and then I went in after it on the blood trail. I mean, it was laying in there dead.
So he sat there all morning watching all those guys.
Yeah, and that's the way it is, and people just don't get that. I mean, you can say it over and over and over again, and people don't get it. Most of the bucks I'm shooting are in overlooked spots right next to the road, or that nobody would think to look in. You got to think of it as like think like you're a wanted person and somebody's out to get you, and they know you're in that swamp. Where would you hide that they wouldn't look? And that's what you got to think about these deer. I mean, it's about their survival, and they don't live to be 5 years old by bedding in the places you see on CNN or whatever station you're watching, but they get that old by finding the little niche you're missing. Because you think about the pressure that's out there. All they have to do is make a mistake one day and they die.
Yep.
So they're machines at staying alive, and they find these little niches, and they don't move far out of them in daylight. And you got to find that spot where they can get away with living without being detected. And if you think of it from that aspect, your hunting will improve greatly.
Yeah.
So a lot of it, or a large percentage of bedding is dictated not only by location but by topography, right? It has to have there's things that you've come to identify that a deer will and won't bed in. what conclusion at this point have you drawn that you are looking for optimally, where you can even look at a map before you even go into an area and kind of know that that's where deer are going to be bedding?
Well, I'm looking for bedding features that are in spots where people don't go. So the main thing around southeastern Wisconsin, and probably in the area where you're from in Michigan, is with the hunting pressure that's in there, is you're looking for wet spots, water. Especially if you're in flatland, water is great. Even big woods. You find water that has cover, whether it's cattails, whether it's dogwood, or whatever, as long as it's got a few high spots in it. And that's not just deer trying to escape people. Wolves, predators, bears, anything. The water is a barrier.
Mm-hmm.
So they love to bed in water on a high little piece of ground, little island or something, surrounded by water. And if you can get that near a road, nobody's going to go over by it. One thing I see is people go to a parking lot and they all either go out a little ways because they're afraid of the woods, or they go out a long ways and try to get further than everybody else. But you never really get away from the people. But if you would park in that parking lot and walk along the road where you can't park and go in 200 yards down in this little thick spot that's got deer cover, but it's a small little patch, only an acre size, that's where I'm finding those bucks. You know?
Is part of water too, had you ever thought that potentially that they can hear like things coming through the
Sure.
water too? Because I've noticed when I've hunted some swampy areas that for me, when I'm sitting there, I can hear a deer coming through the water, and I'm thinking in my head that they identify that too. They can pick up on something that's moving through the water.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm trying to get better at looking at these spots on maps, but I'm still having a hard time. I'll look at the maps and I'll think I know what I'm looking at, but when I actually get boots on ground, it's hard to see when you're starting out like digitally looking at a map, because nowadays that's basically what most people are doing. What at that point are you looking for?
Well, I'm looking for different things in different kind of terrains. But if we're going to stay on the swamp topic for a second, I'm looking for openings. I'm looking for where you can tell there's water because of the brush. And I'm looking for it in isolated places where people wouldn't go. And that can be in the middle of a swamp or marsh, but not always. And I think about the spots by my place. I can get out there a mile and a half from the road and have to go through, an eighth of a mile through waist deep water, and I'll still run into some stands. I'll still run into some people hunting back there. But along the road, I'm not running into hardly anybody.
Do you think that deer take into account bucks' exit strategies for bedding? Is there something in bedding areas?
You need to have a good exit. I mean, if it's, they want an escape route, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's got to be maybe something that butts up to it can't just be butted up to like a big open field where they don't have anywhere to go if they do.
I've seen them bed in spots like that on occasion, but generally they have a good escape route.
Okay.
And like they love to bed on points, right?
Right.
When that point means they got to swim across the lake, not so much. But if that point means run through, some brush, well, yeah, then they're there.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And the thing with looking at maps is, you said that you have a hard time with that. I think everybody does when they start out. I know I certainly did when I first looked at them, because you get on your boots on the ground, it looks a little different. But the more you look at maps and then go confirm it on foot, the better you're going to get. And everybody's looking for that shortcut, and there is none. You got to do the work.
Right.
And when you start looking at those maps and you start piecing them together and pulling them apart and saying, okay, I think this is a good spot, and I think this, and that looks like a deer trail, then you got to go out there and you got to find out.
Right.
And that's what it takes. And you're going to get better and better and better. And it might take a few seasons. And that's all there is to it. Everybody wants you to tell them, okay, look for the little pink spot. You know what I'm saying?
Like there's going to be a dot on the map.
Right, and there's not.
Right.
And I'm probably better at looking at those maps than most. It's hard to describe what I'm looking for, but I'm zooming in really close, number one, with the zoom features. I like using mapping features where I can switch back and forth from topo to aerial and try some different features. And I know a lot of guys like using the like my topo or whatever that is, where it meshes the topo and the aerial together.
Yeah,
I don't like using that because it's just blurry to me. I want to be able to switch back and forth and look at each one in depth instead of a blur of both. And you just got to do it.
Right. That's what I found has been helpful to me when I first started using online maps. It just all looks, pretty similar in big woods where I hunt. But then when I do scouting and I find places, then I go back to the map.
Mm-hmm.
Then I look at that. And then now I identify, oh, yeah, it doesn't stand out like a little pink dot on the map. And now I have a little better idea of what I'm looking for. And I try to replicate that.
Yeah, sometimes, and it's happened to me, you could travel 4 hours to a marsh to hunt and find out that that's not cattails, it's grass.
Yeah.
It's a huge difference.
What is it about cattails? Because I've heard you speak on that a couple times.
Well, the cattails are thick cover in water. So they love to travel in them, move through them, and they feel protected in there. And if you can get a high spot out there, like a little island or something, that's what they're going to be.
Now, do they like to bed there year round, or is it?
Well, that's a hard thing to answer. By my house in the marsh there's deer in there year round and bucks in there year round, but a lot of them do migrate out.
Mm-hmm.
And it depends on snow depth too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it fills up with snow, they're not going through that marsh, and they hate walking on ice that's thin.
Yeah.
Right when it first freezes, when they can break through.
Yep.
You see deer just void the marsh.
Yep, that makes sense.
Your season here opens a little earlier than ours. We were discussing that earlier. You open middle of September?
Yeah.
So I guess, let's even go back from there. Let's start at the first of the year, because I kind of want to just have an overview of your approach season long. So you're scouting all year, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah.
I see your boots. It looks like you spend some time in the woods.
Those are new.
Yeah.
I just bought those this year.
That's what I was getting at. So you said when we were talking earlier, you're kind of waiting for a big. Are you doing anything while there's snow on the ground in the winter?
Yeah. I'll go out there and look around and get on a track and follow it and see where that deer's going, where he's bedding, and all that kind of stuff. They do migrate around. They do move to different areas. Sometimes I hunt in snow. So I do want to know what they do. And when one's bedding in an area, he's probably going to bed in if I run into a deer bedding in that area, and that's where the deer beds in winter, he's probably going to be there. The one good thing is they do lead you to a lot of primary bedding areas in winter when there's snow. And what a primary bedding area is an area where they bed all year. And the reason for that is the later in the year it gets, the less cover they have. So there's only so many places they can bed and hide when there's snow on the ground. Well, those places that are left like that are the spots that are the best spots all year. And you can find those in winter. Another thing about winter scouting in the snow is we were talking about overlooked spots. If you're having a hard time grasping that, as we had a discussion earlier, if you're having a hard time grasping that, get on a giant buck track out in a marsh or woods or something and follow him till you find where he bedded. And you're going to start to see what I mean.
Yeah.
Because I've done that for years. I've followed him around in the snow. And, some of the best hunters I know are trackers. And they're all around good hunters because they track deer with a gun during gun season or whatever.
Right.
One that comes to mind is that Magic Man from my site, Todd Havel.
Okay.
He's a great gun hunter as a tracker. And when I talk to him, he has great insight on bedding and knows exactly what I'm talking about overlooked spots, because those tracks always lead to those overlooked spots. They lead to the spots where they're watching hunter access, and you start to really get a good grasp on it. And the best time to do that is when you get your first snows, because you're still on that fall pattern, and they don't start falling into that winter pattern yet, and they still move around as if there was no snow. So that first snow you get is probably the best time to get on those tracks and follow them around. But that can teach you so much. And if you pay attention to what the wind was doing, like if it's the day after it snowed, you know what the wind was when the deer bedded there, right?
Yeah.
Then you can start looking at wind direction, how he was laying there with the wind, how he went into his bed in the wind. That's how I learned all the stuff I know, is by following those deer around and watching them. That's how I know that they walk nose to wind into their beds and turn around and watch their back trail.
Is it by track size that you're distinguishing that? Because sometimes when I see beds in snow, I can tell there was a deer laying here. But how do you go about identifying that was a buck or that was a doe?
Well, it can be tricky, but there are some tricks to it. Now, obviously, a buck has a bigger track if it's a mature buck. There can be big does, but there isn't does that weigh 250 pounds. And I'm generally after a much bigger buck. That doesn't mean everybody is. And somebody might want to identify if it's a buck or a doe if it's smaller. One thing about bucks versus does is on a buck, the chest is bigger than the hind end. In a doe, the hind end is bigger than the chest. So the front legs, the front tracks, will be on the inside on a doe. On a buck, they'll be on the outside.
Really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
You can kind of start to look at how bucks walk through brush and stuff and how they go around something because their rack will get caught or whatever, where a doe goes right through it.
Yeah, and I've heard, too, a lot of times when those deer are getting close to their beds, they might mill around a little bit, and you can potentially identify where their rack's rubbing in and out of the snow and see that, too.
Now, did you read any books, or is this all just what you've learned from, doing it over the years? Because I know the Benoits or whatever, they have a few books out on tracking.
No, I haven't really read anything. The person I learned the most about deer tracking from, beyond myself, is Todd Havel.
Okay.
I mean, I've had a lot of long discussions with him online. He brought some stuff up to me, but most of the stuff I've learned on my own by following tracks and stuff like that.
Is back to bedding too. Is a lot of that dictated by deer social structure? Like, I had it described to me as real estate, and the big dog in the neighborhood can buy up the good real estate, and then everybody else is kind of left to take what's available. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that sounds pretty accurate. I never heard it put that way, but it's pretty accurate. The best bedding areas are going to hold the biggest bucks. And a lot of time if bedding area is good, it'll have satellite bedding. A lot of deer will go there to bed, and the smaller ones aren't allowed in. So they'll bed on the outskirts. And those are the ones that are hard to hunt because you're getting in there bumping deer. But, I see a lot of people tell me they found a buck bed or it's worn in, and they're really excited. Usually you ain't finding a bed. The spots where I'm killing those big bucks repeatedly are usually areas, not one particular bed. There'll be like 20 or 30 beds in there, maybe even more in a spot, anywhere from 10 yards around to an acre. And he'll move his bed based on the wind, and there'll be other bucks that bed in there, and sometimes a different buck will be there. It's not like one buck owns that spot either, and people get that misconception too. There's bedding areas where I've killed bucks year after year out of the same exact bed at the same time frame. And sometimes you go in there and the buck you're after isn't the one that comes out, and the next time it is.
Now, being that they have different beds in there for different winds, do they also leave that bedding area differently for different winds?
No. They come into it for different winds.
But they'll leave it.
They leave it just,
Because they're comfortable, they've been in there, they feel that they have an idea of what's been going on around them.
Yeah, I would say that's probably accurate. I've never asked a deer to find that out. But I think that they're sitting there, and in my mindset, the way I see it is that they're sitting there, and they can hear and see and smell. And what I say is they have a safe zone. They got an area around their bed where they can see, smell, or hear, and maybe not all of those factors, but some of them for sure. And there's a radius there, and I would draw a circle around that bed. Maybe in a swamp, it's 40 yards, a 40-yard radius.
Okay.
And maybe in more open woods, like a hill country or something, maybe it's 200 yards. But there's an area where they feel comfortable. If something got in there, they'd know it.
Right.
And they will move in that area pretty freely. They'll
Yeah.
get up, move around during the day a little bit. They'll move to the borders of it. And, of course, occasionally they make a mistake and move beyond it, or people wouldn't kill deer, right?
Right.
But my goal is to get on the edge of that radius. I want to get right up to the smell, sight, hearing range, as close as I can get, and that's where I want to kill them. Because then I can do it on a regular basis. I can do it continually year after year. I can hunt like that and kill big bucks. It's what they do daily. If you're sitting back in a funnel, you're waiting for that deer to make a mistake and move too far. If you're sitting on a food plot, you're waiting for a deer to make a mistake. And you know what deers hardly ever make mistakes? The ones that get to be 5 or 6.
Right.
What are you targeting?
Yeah.
You know, so that's my mythology in it.
I've heard it put. I don't know if it was on podcast that I listened to or what, but I heard it as for a hunter to be successful, they only have to get it right once, and they can fail, as many
Mhm.
times as possible. But for a deer to get it right, he has to be right every time.
Right? Yeah.
And if he fails once,
Right.
Talk about what you mentioned, satellite bucks, because that fascinates me. I have a little bit of a theory on it, but I want to hear your opinion. I was always under the impression, I was told that, bucks won't have anything to do with other bucks, especially around the rut.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen some different things, but talk about what satellite bucks are.
Well, it's interesting the way you said that. But for me, what satellite bucks are is that those little bucks can't bed in a big buck spot. And what I've seen, let's just do it by observation instead of what I think. What I've seen is a big buck go in a bedding area, and a little while later a smaller buck come in to bed down, run into him, or smell him, or see him or sense him, turn around, come back out and bed on the fringe. And what I've also seen is a small buck going in bed, and a big buck show up, and the little buck get up and move, and the big buck sit where that little buck was. I see them a little more friendly outside of the rut, but I have seen on certain occasions, right there in the rut, 2 bucks hanging together.
Mhm.
But it usually seems like one of them is in control. But
Yeah. When I started probably going on my second year of trying this approach to get into hunting, bedding, and staging, more often than not, when I had a buck in my presence, even in the middle of the rut, I was finding it was 2 bucks or 3 bucks. And I found that kind of interesting because I always thought, especially come the rut, that they were very much just doing their own thing and didn't have tolerance for having other bucks around. And 2 years in a row now, I've seen this where now that I'm, like you had talked about earlier, you get a little older after you've killed a lot of deer, or you've killed some smaller deer and you're graduating into wanting to target bigger deer. I'm passing on 2.5-year-old bucks, whereas I used to be shooting these deer. Well, 2 times this has happened to me where a 2-year-old came through, and then within, a couple minutes later, right down the same path came a mature buck, a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old. And I thought in my head, is it possible that they identify as letting these younger bucks move ahead of them as a safety precaution and traveling behind them? Have you ever seen anything like that?
I've seen similar, but I don't think it's what you're thinking it is. I've seen the opposite too, where I've seen a big buck come by and then a smaller one. And I think what it is that if you think about it, there's only so many places you can hide in a hunting area, right? Per se. We talked about the overlooked spots and stuff, right? All the deer in that area are jammed into those spots, and you're in a high concentration of deer. You're in the right spot. I mean, there's often times that I'm sitting and I see multiple deer, and I think it's just that, in my perception, that I'm in an area where the deer feel safe.
Yeah. Seeing hunt in heavily pressured areas, like we were talking last night, which is what we both hunt, you might only a couple times a year see, or a handful of times a year, a dozen times a year, see a 2.5-year-old, 3.5-year-old
Mhm.
buck. And for a lot of guys, as soon as that deer comes through, they're pulling the trigger.
Mhm.
And as I backed off that the last couple of years, it just happened to me 2 times, and I
Mhm.
thought it was ironic that behind him came a bigger deer, and I just wondered in my head if there was something to that, because in the past, if I had pulled the trigger on that smaller deer, I would have never had that opportunity. And I
Mhm.
didn't know if that's something that's going to keep repeating itself, or if it was just a,
Well, you know, in order to shoot big bucks, you got to hunt big bucks, and I don't know about if that's random or if you're onto something, but certainly your odds up by passing a smaller deer.
right,
Absolutely.
right,
If your goal is to get a bigger one.
right. Yeah, and I think I saw numbers too all through the country last year that people are, or at least the age structure, and people are laying off 1.5 year, 2.5-year-old bucks. I think it was like a record book year last year for people shooting 3 and 4 and
Mhm.
5-year-old bucks and laying off bigger deer.
Here's my prediction. This year is going to be the year. The early spring and all the water we've gotten. I think Michigan's got kind of the same thing going. There's going to be a lot bigger bucks this year. I think they're going to be percentage-wise of antler bigger.
Well, 2 years in a row now we've had mild winters, right?
Yeah. I notice shining that the buck sizes are a lot bigger. The year-olds I'm seeing are, like 80 inches instead of 60.
Uh-huh.
And the 2-year-olds I'm seeing are, into Pope and Young. And I think there's going to be some big racks running around this fall.
So we started to talk on it about your yearly approach. So we kind of talked about what you're doing in the winter. Then when would you say you focus the percentage of your effort in scouting? And what is, say, for the guy that has limited time, what time of year is kind of critical, and what overall? I mean, you're obviously looking for bedding.
Yeah, I know what you're looking at, but I think it's all critical to success. But if you want to hunt bedding and no bedding, the best time to look at the bedding is probably during season, after you've tagged out. And then the second best time, which is probably the time most people go out, is right when the season ends. And the sign is still there. And if you're in an area that has snow, the snow can kind of preserve those beds and stuff. When it melts, they're kind of still there. The deer might move and bed other places when there's snow on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
but the beds will still be under the snow. So the best time to look for beds is probably early spring. I think you got about a 3 or 4 month window depending on where you're at.
And then after spring, when summer green up comes, do you have different approaches for early season, mid season, and late season, or are you utilizing the bed hunting basically? Does it change throughout the?
I don't know what you mean.
Like, do you have a early season approach versus how you're targeting these deer versus when bow season's getting wrapped up and you're getting into gun season versus late season, or is it all relying around bedding?
The majority of my hunting relies around bedding, and the reason is that deer just don't move, or at least the type of deer I want to target just don't move in daylight,
Right.
any kind of distance outside of the rut. And even during the rut, mature bucks still don't go running around rampant chasing does. They might do that 1 or 2 days a year and make that mistake day. And I don't want to hunt based on what they do 1 or 2 days of the year.
Okay.
So I'm hunting based on what they do all the time, or at least the majority of the time. And that's getting in on their bedding. Even during rut, I get on bigger bucks by hunting bedding. The bucks that I've shot hunting rut funnels, for me, have all been, 2-year-olds and at the best 3. The big bucks, the old bucks, just don't. I mean, they've learned those lessons. They don't get to be 5, 6 years old by running around willy-nilly past hunters. I mean, walk through a public grounds and look at all the hunters.
Right.
Look at all the people in the parking lots. Those deer are moving very short distances in daylight. I mean, there's a lot of people, like in my hometown, will accuse me of poaching and stuff, and nobody could kill deer like he does, and that kind of crap. And what it really is that I'm pushing that envelope, and they're sitting there conservatively back too far, and the distance doesn't have to be too far. You know, you talked before about that video I got on YouTube, that Chasing a Dream.
Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed I mentioned that that other guy that was hunting on that property, and he wasn't seeing anything. He was seeing a lot of little deer. He was seeing more deer than me, but they're all little bucks, all does. You know how close he was hunting to me? 100, 150 yards in most cases.
That close.
Right. He wasn't in the right spot. To me, it comes down to the exact tree. And you'd probably be shocked if you hunted with me in one of those situations. The biggest thing I'm doing when I'm moving around like that mobile is picking the tree. I'm creeping in there. I'm taking my time about, okay, where do I got to be? What's the wind doing? I'm checking the wind constantly. I'm looking at the trees. Where can I slip in here and set up and be close enough? Because I want it to be as close as possible. And in a lot of these places that are swampy, like you hunt and like I hunt back home, you really got to push that envelope on that swamp. Guys are up into the hardwoods where the trail's coming out, where the rubber line's coming up into the woods to an oak ridge or something. I'm in that swamp. I'm right over them beds, and I'm watching those deer get out of their beds. I've creeped in there, and I can see them. If I can't kill them, I know where they move, and the next day I'm moving. And if the deer ain't what I'm looking for, I'm on to the next spot. And I can cover a swamp like that, hundreds of acres in a couple weeks, like you saw in that video. I covered that whole area.
Right.
You know, hundreds of acres. I went through that whole thing and saw probably every decent buck that was in that swamp.
Yeah, and you're hardly ever sitting in the same location repetitively, right?
Right. Those deer know if you've been there.
Right.
And even if they didn't, they do, but even if they didn't, there wasn't a deer there yesterday, why would there be one today? Why would you go back to the same tree?
Yeah.
I think a guy could literally take a dart, throw it at a topo map, sit wherever it lands, and he'd do a hell of a lot better than the guy that goes to 3 different stands and rotates through them.
Interesting.
That's kind of like when I first started hunting public land more. You'd have spots that I would always go, you know, start out hunting over bait or whatever. And I'd never see good bucks. Well, I had a buddy that would go with his dad, and they had climbers. Well, they would just go find a trail and climb up a tree and hunt. And he was seeing, you know, good bucks a lot more often than I was. And I couldn't figure it out. Like, he hadn't scouted that spot. He'd never been there before. How's he? Well, it was just he'd never been there before, and that was, you know,
Yeah.
that was why. Nothing had ever been in there, and he was in there for the first time. And that kind of made me realize, like, okay, I can't keep going back to a spot I've already been, you know.
Yeah, you got to keep the deer guessing.
Yep. Yeah.
What's your method for getting in so close quietly without... I feel like myself personally, I have a hard time getting that distance quietly in and getting set up without alerting deer unless I'm going in like real early in the morning before they're coming into those bedding areas. But you like to focus on the evening, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of deer are bedded before daylight.
Yeah.
And when they come in nose to wind. They generally sense you. So I'm not saying mornings are a bad time to hunt. I'm just saying they're not as good as evenings. Evenings, they always get up before dark and at least move a little distance. Mornings, a lot of times they're bedded before daylight. My idea for getting in close is to go slow. Take my time. Plan my route. I'm looking ahead of me. I'm not just, walking going, okay, now I got a big branch in front of me. I'm looking ahead of me. I'm stopping constantly. I'm thinking about what I'm doing. And if I think I can't creep any further, that's where I'm going up a tree. And that's a big part of being mobile, too. You probably pre-pick some trees, but I usually don't just pick one tree. There's a lot of them I got in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about, when I'm scouting, where I can be. And you get better at it because when you go in the fall and that tree that you wanted to get to, you can't get to, you realize, okay, next time I got to be back a little further. And over years, you'll get better and better at it. But I go in there and if it's windy, I can get closer. Some places I cannot hunt the bucks in those beds unless it's windy, rainy, or get some sort of sound barrier. And a lot of times I can. But I think people don't give themselves enough credit on how quiet they can be, or how quiet they actually are. For instance, when you walk through cattails, to yourself you sound like a freight train. You're like, how could I get anywhere quiet? But I constantly go through these cattails, go up a tree, and have a buck get up right next to me with no idea I'm there. And when you're sitting in a tree, you can hear that buck coming for a mile. But what I've noticed is in the cases where I got to hunt off the ground, I can't hear them till they're right on top of me. And I believe that's because your sound ain't traveling through those cattails.
I get you.
It's like a wall.
Right.
So it's going up. So you just gotta push that envelope and try. And what's the worst thing that can happen? You fail.
Right.
And you know what happens when you fail? You learn a valuable lesson. You learn where your limit is.
Right.
You don't know your limits unless you test them. That's a fact. You got to push them. And if you're not occasionally kicking a deer out of its bed, you're not in the game. I mean, you're too far back.
Yeah.
Every now and then you've got to make that mistake in order to know that you're pushing it far enough.
When you do go too far, when you do kick that deer out of that bed, is that hunt blown? And
No,
then
I usually climb up a tree and hunt anyways, but it usually changes my spot. I like swinging around to the downwind side and setting up then and hoping he comes back, and they do occasionally. They don't a lot. I mean, it might be 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 5 times they come back. But the odds of getting a buck 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 5, I'll take that over sitting a different spot any day.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that.
Now, will they circle back downwind of their bed or circle back down the wind of where they heard you?
They
When you
circle
kick
downwind
them.
of the bed usually.
Okay.
I can think of one that I jumped this big buck I was after, and he was with a doe. He was bedded in a doe bedding area adjoining his bedding area, and I was slipping to his bedding area and kicked him out of this little doe bedding area, and he went one way and the doe went the other. So I went and set up in a tree right in the middle, and I remember how foolish I thought I was when that deer swung around right downwind where I should have been, where I know better should have been, and I would have killed that thing, but he winded me. But I went right over the top of the bed, which is a rookie mistake.
What about sign? Like growing up reading magazines, scrapes and rubs, and I know to this day, I'll roll into hunting camp and the guys will say, "Oh, you gotta hunt here. There's a bunch of fresh scrapes." Is that stuff that you take into account in your method?
Well, sign always comes into play, but I think it's a lot less important in a lot of cases than people make it. If you go out, like even around here, I mean, if this is a heavily hunted area, you go out and there's a huge rub on a pine tree right here. You watch the stands pop up around that tree with no regard to why it's there or what's going on. To me, that sign has to be someplace where they move in daylight, or why would I want to hunt there? If the deer's doing that at midnight, what's the use of putting a stand there? And you got to remember, those signs, like the scrapes and the rubs and stuff, are attracting all these hunters. They're all excited about it. But when you think about it, what time frame does a deer move? From 20 minutes before dark to 20 minutes after daylight. There's a 95% chance that was made at night.
Right.
So once again, I'm relating that to daytime movement areas, which are going to be adjacent to bedding areas.
So is that something that you could potentially identify, find that, and know maybe that I do have some bedding in proximity to here, and that
Right.
it's potentially a travel route to a food source, or
Absolutely.
it's not just random, right?
Absolutely. Sign can be random, but it can also have meaning. I think all sign has meaning. It's just that we can't think like a deer, and we can't know what it means all the time.
Right.
All we can do is guess. But there's places I know where a rub line, when it pops open, I know where that buck's bedded, and in a couple cases I can think it's hundreds and hundreds of yards away where I have to be to kill that buck. But I can check this rub line where he does that at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and this is being open. I can hunt this buck over here at this bedding area. Matter of fact, I killed one of the biggest ones in the marsh that very method. I knew where he was bedding. That same buck I was just talking about, I killed him the next year. And I killed him in rut again because that's when he'd come onto the public land. Is during rut he'd come mate with the does. And he'd bed in this one bedding area that if anything big was in there, it always held up in that spot. And I knew which bed he'd be in, but I didn't know when he would be in there. And I don't want to get my scent in this bedding area and ruin it beforehand. So I'd check on that rub line around rut a couple times. And then I heard some rumors around town that some people had shined him. So I went in there, walked back, checked that rub line. It was open. Went, climbed that tree, and killed him the first day I hunted him the next year.
Oh, shit.
He got up out of his bed right in front of me, right where I expected him. Walked 75 yards from me. Now, this is peak rut. It was Halloween night. And there was guys hunting all over the place because people were shining them in the fields around there. And there was guys all around, and I had to walk under guys' tree stands to get to my spot. And I shot that thing 75 yards from his bed right at closing time. That's all the further it got. So what chance do you got if you're 200 yards back?
Right. Yeah, and that's why I was intrigued by how you get in there quietly, because some of the spots that I've identified as buck bedding, and that's why they chose it.
Mm-hmm.
It's really difficult to get into that.
Go slow.
Yeah.
That's the main thing is slow.
And it's got to be the
methodical.
right day, right weather, like
Yeah.
you just said. And
If it's
dry
that bad, you have to wait. I mean, hill country is notorious for that. You get those dry leaves. Yeah. Try getting close to them in dry leaves. That's just insane. You got to wait for a rain day if you know one's bedding in there or whatever.
Yeah.
You know.
Now, what about, this may sound like a dumb question, but in a swamp or wet area, how do you keep from when you step in mud, how do you keep from that suction noise when you go to lift your foot up out of it?
Did you watch that Chasing a Dream video?
Oh, yeah, you go barefoot, don't you?
Yeah, I went barefoot. Getting away from that suction noise is hard. Yeah. I've tried leaning your toes forward and turning your foot when you pull it out. There are some things you can do, but in some cases you can't get away with it.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you have to hunt further back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, do what you got to do.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be extreme about it, you can take your boots and your socks and your pants off.
Right.
Throw them over your shoulder or over your backpack and get through it quietly, and then put
You're getting a little extreme there. I don't think anybody in their right mind would do that.
Well, I'm thinking in my head that I got some spots like that, and I don't have any waders. So
I remember when I was young, I used to undress to cross a deep river to get to the other side.
Yeah.
And it was like, December.
It sounds more appealing to me than hauling a canoe in or...
I don't know what the appeal is of waders. Everybody's like, you don't use waders? I'm like, why?
Yeah, it seems like a lot.
It just seems like a lot of extra work.
Yeah. It seems easier to me, just take your clothes off and chuck them across the river and get them on the other side, right?
Yeah, Mario seems to like it. He gets a good kick out of it.
Well, obviously, we talked a lot about water. Deer aren't going to bed far from water because during the day they probably need to utilize that as well, right?
I don't know if they need water. I've seen them in places well away from water. I think the water is more of a safety factor.
Okay. And it's a great factor, like you said, for keeping human intrusion out. A high percentage of guys just, they're not willing to cross that river, right?
Right. I do see them bed near water in hot weather. I don't know how much hot weather you get, but in September, a lot of times we can have it 80 degrees out.
Yeah, the first couple weeks of October can be hot and humid and mosquitoes. Mm-hmm. But I've never had luck hunting over water. I
shot a pretty good buck, 150s, maybe 160, over a water hole when it was 85 degrees out.
Okay. Yeah, it's pretty rare, I guess, in October to get 85, but it does happen. I guess getting back on track with the seasonal approach thing, is there anything else that you want to bring up that throughout the year that you've feel over the years has added to your, consistent success year in, year out, something that you're doing that we haven't talked about yet?
No. I think that the one problem thing that a lot of people have is maybe determining when a bed's being used. I think that's the hardest feature, and probably something people want to hear about. But that's something really hard to just discuss in a podcast. I mean, didn't we kind of discuss that on the way up here?
Yeah.
A little bit. Yeah.
I think Kevin was sleeping, but.
Oh,
me and
okay.
you did.
That's
me and you?
probably why.
Yeah.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say I don't remember that.
Yeah. In between when you were messing with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the deer, and off of that, they don't just have one bed, obviously, right? They have
Right.
different beds in
There's
somewhat.
seasonal bedding, and there's primary bedding, and there's rut bedding. There's all kinds of ways they bed, and I've really been tuning in on that most of my life, and that's what's really helped me kill all the bucks that I've killed, is by tuning in on how they bed. And it's harder to describe it than to know it. I mean, I've gotten to the point now where I can walk into a woodlot, look around, and I know where the deer are going to be. And it's hard to tell somebody that. And there's probably some listeners that have come a ways and are up there where I'm at or beyond, who are probably shaking their head going, yeah, I know what you mean. I can do the same thing, but I can't tell my buddy, you know. You know, I'll look at factors like food sources. A lot of bedding revolves around food. I mean, primary bedding is the best because they're there all the time. But even primary bedding has its peaks and valleys.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's reasons they want to bed in that area. I mean, they might have a bed because of a patch of oak trees, you know, or a bedding area. And when those oaks are dropping acorns, they're there, you know, and there's going to be something good in there. But it's one little time frame in the year, and it might be every other year on something like in farm country where it's based on a crop that's planted every other year, you know, or the time framing of that crop coming into the point where they want to eat it. And it could be on a wild plant that we don't even know about. It could have to do with cover. A spot that is awesome in September might suck in January for cover. And with the right mindset, you can look at this and go, okay, you know, when is this bed being used? And think about those things and make an educated guess. There's going to be some times when you look at a bed and you go, I don't know, you know, and we'll all do that, me included. And when you do that, but you still think, man, this bedding area needs to be hunted. Well, I got a rule of 3 hunts. I'll throw a hunt at it in early season. I'll throw a hunt at it in a rut, and I'll throw a hunt in a late season, and I'll see, you know. If I don't see a deer in any of those hunts, which is quite possible because most of the time we fail. If I don't see a deer in those hunts, I will see the sign. When I'm getting in that close, I'll see if deer have been in there, and I'll know, you know, if that's been used recently.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so again, it's not something that's going to come along in a season. It takes some work. It takes some effort. It takes some dedication. A lot of guys get into the whole beast mode of hunting like I do, all gung-ho, and saying, hey, this really makes sense. I really love this. And a year later, they're quitting going, this is bullshit. You know, this ain't going to work. You know, I couldn't get nothing. You know, you're going to fail a little bit. You're not going to see the deer you see hunting crop fields. You're not going to see the deer you see sitting in a patch of oaks on the side of a marsh. But you know what you are going to see? Bigger bucks. It's just there's going to be a lot less of them.
Right.
But you're going to start seeing mature bucks. So you got to get past the whole seeing deer thing. To me, if I'm sitting out there and 10 bucks walk past me, if they're not target bucks, I could care less. It's like seeing 10 squirrels.
Yeah.
That's not the target. That's not what I'm after. But some people need that cuddling of seeing those
I get
little
that.
deer. You know what I'm saying?
I get that.
Yeah, I'd come across your forum there 4 years ago or so, and ever since, you know, I've been trying to hunt that style along with other styles too, but I still have yet to kill one that I've watched get up out of its bed
Mhm.
and come past me and I've shot them. Now I've got to the point where I'm starting to see them getting up out of their bed, but now I got to get to where they're going after they're getting, you know,
Right.
to where they're going to come by me, or I hear them, you know. I might not see them, but I hear them get up, you know.
Yeah.
It'll be dead still, and then all of a sudden there'll be a deer there within 100 yards walking. Well, he didn't just appear there. He stood up out of his bed. And
Yeah, you know, you think about that hunt I was just telling you about that 165-inch 10-pointer I was hunting.
Mm-hmm.
I guessed where he'd be bedded. I looked at those rubs, thought where he'd be bedding. I set up in a tree. I was staring at the bed when he stood up, walked to me, and I killed him.
Mm-hmm.
That ain't like just going out and shooting a buck.
Yeah.
There is a euphoria there of success. You predicted where he was going to be.
Oh,
it was
yeah.
a planned hunt. It's hunting with a reason.
Yep.
And it's scouting with a reason. It's not going out wandering around the woods looking for a rub or a scrape or, well, this looks like a good spot. You know, it's actually, you know, there's a reason for what you're doing. There's a reason for why the deer are there, and it starts putting things together. But my point is this sounds granular, but it takes work.
Oh, yeah.
And you got to
Yeah.
put some effort in. And now you've been doing this for 4 years, you said?
Yeah.
And you're still working up to the point of trying to get good success out
Yeah,
of it.
of being successful once at, finding the bed, hunting it at the right time, and having that buck come by me when it leaves the bed. I mean, that's 4 years of scouting in the springs and hunting in the fall. I'm in Michigan, so, yeah, maybe it'd be a little harder, but, I mean, I'm getting it now, though, where, the first 2 years, I was like, I don't even know, I mean, the beds are right where, you always explain them to be, but I wasn't seeing the deer getting up out of them or,
Yeah.
But then gradually I started getting, a sighting here or, hearing them get up there. And so now I know, it's obvious it works. You just got to fine tune it to, and it's still, I mean, even at your level, you're not, every time you hunt a bed, you're not killing a buck,
Right.
So.
Yeah, and that's a thing, too. I mean, a lot of guys look at the wall of bucks I got or see the articles. They see the success.
Mm-hmm.
They hear about the success because it's not like guys like me or you jump up and down and go, hey, today I didn't get one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But most of the time,
Yep.
we're out there failing.
Yeah.
It's a failure after failure after failure and then a success.
Yep.
And most of it is mindset. I think my strongest asset is my confidence and my belief in what I'm doing.
Yep.
I think you got to have that. If you go in there going, well, I'm going to try this, but I don't believe in it, you're probably going to fail.
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking about this with a lot of guys that hunt all different. You got your guys that believe completely in the moon, your guys that believe completely in scent control. You on buck bedding, and what I've noticed and what I think is those guys have such a confidence in their style of hunting. They don't, if you don't have confidence in some, you don't put all your effort into being as precise in everything. Okay, if you're a moon phase guy and he thinks he's got the right moon, he's going to hunt his best spot.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to be as, meticulous as possible getting in there, being as quiet and everything. So that right in itself is going to up his odds. He's not just trouncing in there and, it might work, it might not. He has faith, he has confidence in it, so he's going to do his best to, make it work.
Certainly, yeah.
So
He mentioned the moon. Do you take that into account at all?
Yeah, I do a little bit. I'm not real worried about the moon, but when I rut hunt and I travel and I'm trying to get that deer to move a little earlier or something, I like having that moon overhead or underfoot. And I've noticed when hunting western Wisconsin during the rut in travel corridors, which, like I said before, I usually don't see mature bucks, but occasionally you see one make a mistake. I see a lot of the deer move right at moon overhead or underfoot within an hour of that. And I remember the last time I rut hunted up there, I saw 9 bucks cruising during daytime, and all but one were within that 1 hour of moon phase. But with that said, I can't even hardly see any moon phase influence on the deer by my homeland, my home area.
Mm-hmm.
But they're so nocturnal, you don't get rut movement during midday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was always told that full moon was bad for deer hunting because, the deer it's bright at night and the deer are out and they're real active. And I've kind of found it to be the exact opposite. I've seen more deer on a bright moon. And something that I had just read from a study that a couple whitetail biologists at I'm trying to remember what school it came out of, but they were finding that it very much did vary
Mm-hmm.
area to area, and it's not necessarily that the moon directly has some type of scientific thing that makes deer move and not move. It's a lot of it had to depend on predation
Mm-hmm.
in the area, and that deer were less likely to move when the moon is bright at night because they were having a lot more encounters with coyotes, wolves,
Mm.
bears. And so that deer would be a little calmer and quiet and not move as much on a bright moon,
Mm-hmm.
which would lead to a little more increased daytime activity. And that made sense to me of why some areas it would affect and some areas it wasn't, because even though there are predators on the landscape pretty much everywhere, there's definitely more in some spaces than there is in
Mhm.
others.
Yeah, makes sense.
Now, Dan, you were talking about hunting the hills during the rut. How did you? Because I know you've been successful in farm country and
Mhm.
hunting swamps and hill country. How did you get to learn all those different terrains?
Uh, I got to learn all those different terrains because we have them all right here.
Mm-hmm.
I've got in Wisconsin, I've got big woods, I've got rolling hills, I got bluff hills, and I have flat farmland, and I have swampland, and I have big marshes.
Mm-hmm.
It's got every terrain I could want right here, and I've hunted all the way across the state my whole life, and I travel.
Mm-hmm.
So it's given me the opportunity to learn all that stuff. And I also I scout people's properties for them.
Okay.
And looking at people's properties is a great thing, because when you go do 10 properties like that a year and put the pieces together, you start to learn some things yourself.
Yeah.
You start to see some tendencies. It gives you a big confidence boost when you see what you predict on a map before you go look at this guy's property be exactly what you thought, or you see something different. I mean, there's times I've learned a thing or two. One guy, he had me map scout his property, and it was right in this range, right in Black River Falls.
Mhm.
And he had hilly property, and he said, Dan, I'm having a hard time finding the bedding. Can you help me out? Can you look at a map? So I says, all right. So I look at a map, and I says, well, I'm going to be bedding off this point here, this point here, this point here. And he gets back to me, and he says, you know what? There's some beds up there, but they're not like what I would expect. And I'm like, you're probably just not looking at them right. They're probably using them more than you think. And he goes, okay. So the next spring he calls me up and he says, Dan, I hunted those spots religiously. I only saw little bucks bedding up there. He goes, we're finding huge sheds. I'm getting pictures of these big bucks. He goes, they're on the property. I'm getting daylight pictures. They're not in those hills. They're not up there. I'm missing something. He goes, can I hire you to come out and look at the property? So he did. I drove out there, and I'm going to go up on that hill, and I'm going to show him where those beds are. I know where they are, and he's just missing it. That's what I'm thinking, right? So I go up there, and the beds don't look all that used. The rubs that are by them are finger size, and I know there's big bucks in the area. I'm like kind of puzzled, but you start looking around, and he's got this lowland, and the lowland's really thick, and the hills are a little open.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, let's go down there and take a look around. And down in that lowland are some little hills, little rises and stuff, and that's where them bucks were. And we found them, and so I learned something there. And you learn not to be so cocky to really believe in yourself that much to tell this guy he's wrong over the phone. Well, I never walked it. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So learning that terrain mostly by always moving around. And I'll tell you, a lot of guys want to lock themselves in, and they want to hunt this their daddy's farm or the neighbor's 40 or something, and well, that's where I hunt. And how many guys, they go, I got a hunting spot. I got a farm I hunt, right?
Yeah.
You know what? I hunt a million places.
Oh, yeah.
You never know where I'm going to be.
Yep.
I could be 100 miles from here hunting.
Yep.
And because of that, I'm always growing as a hunter. You don't get locked into one property, one landscape, one type of deer.
Yep.
You really grow as a hunter by putting yourself outside of that box.
Yep.
You-
Yeah, I agree.
You brought me right into what I wanted to ask you next, and it's about small properties, and I just wanted to touch on that. Well, I guess it's a two-part thing. One, I was wondering what you've observed for how far will deer travel? Because, you know, I was always told that, you know, early season deer kind of sit tight, and then when the rut happens, it's just chaos and they go everywhere. For a guy that's hunting small properties, and it's always a discussion in Michigan because most properties are real small,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the common statement, well, if I don't shoot them, my neighbor's gonna.
Mm-hmm.
But is it possible to create an area, even if you're on 20 acres, and let's say it's your private property, you have the ability, as long as you have some features, to create this bedding and potentially will deer stay in that small of an area, or are they just bound to travel miles?
You know, I think it could be done, but it'd be very, very difficult to hold one on a 20-acre property. But it could be done. And the reason I say it could be done is, like I can think of about a 30, 40-acre property that's by a farm that I hunt. And the area's got really heavy pressure. And the people who owned this farm were anti-hunters and animal lovers. And they didn't let nobody hunt on that property. And if you shot a deer and it ran on their property, you couldn't go get it. They wouldn't allow it. They hated hunters. And that's their right, and I support that. But you drive past here at noon on opening day of gun season, and there's 4 10-pointers sitting out there eating. You know, and why? Because there's no pressure there.
Because there's nobody hunting.
Yeah, there's nobody there. And there's nobody on the farm next to it. There's nobody there for 6 months. But you know what it does that? That 7th month, there's a guy there a couple times. Those deer know where they're being hunted. You have to create an area where they feel safe. The trouble with that is if you don't hunt them, you don't kill them. And they'll grow up there and live there and not come out and not come off. You gotta occasionally push that envelope to kill them. And a lot of guys think that what I do is really aggressive. A lot of guys from the outside who've never tried it. They're like, oh, that guy's so aggressive. He kicks deer out. He ruins the area or whatever. But really, I'm a lot less aggressive than most people. I've got a 70-acre property that a friend of mine owns near my house, and that's probably the only private property I really hunt. And we go in there and we hunt about once every 2 weeks, and we hunt the same day. We hunt together. And if it were me, I'd probably be even less than once every 2 weeks. And but he wants to hunt himself too, you know. But we're real careful about how we access and stuff, and we leave certain areas completely alone and just target where they come out of the bedding. And we have a planned access. I mean, it's pretty intricate how we get through there and how seldom we hunt it. And because of that, it's a little better than the neighboring properties that get pounded.
Yeah.
You know.
I've always had the belief too that if you move around and hunt a lot of different areas, and say you do have access to a small private parcel, if you do stay out of there earlier on in the season, a lot of deer movement kind of changes when people start hitting the woods, right? And if you have an area that you're potentially leaving alone that has the structure needed for deer to bed, deer from the area could potentially reload. Like, would a more mature deer move onto your property and kick a less mature, even if you had a deer that all summers, let's say, he's bedding on your small parcel, but then people start infiltrating the public land and the neighboring properties? Is it possible that if you're, leaving your spot alone and hunting, traveling around hunting other places, that, through that time frame, the bigger deer or multiple deer may come occupy that space and identify it safe?
Well, absolutely. That 70-acre farm, sometimes we don't gun hunt it at all. Sometimes we hunt it once or twice, and usually at the end of the gun week. And we always see bucks in their gun season, and bucks that weren't there earlier. But everything around it gets completely driven, and we don't drive our private land. We only drive public.
We started to take that approach on some of the smaller parcels that we hunt, is not even going in until Halloween.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I get your approach. It might work on your property, but the reason I say that is if you got a big buck bed in there in early season, and an easy way to kill him, you should hit it in early season. But my approach would be not to overhunt it.
Right.
to go in when it's time to go in.
Yeah, I guess I'll take that back and say that what we typically do is maybe hunt it, the first a couple handful of times.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
The early, and then once pressure starts to pick up locally, we'll kind of back off of it and try to provide a safe space. And
Yeah.
then we're in that space when the time and the weather's right.
Yeah, it's all about timing. You certainly don't want to overhunt something. A lot of my hunting on those small properties is observation, sitting back and watching,
Right.
not going in until it's time.
What's your opinion on the lull?
Well, I would say that there probably is a little bit of a lull in early October. Not necessarily mid-October. I started to see pre-rut stuff in mid-October. But that early lull, and what I mean by a lull is September, I'm seeing some pretty good action. Early October, I see it peter down a little bit, and I see it pick back up in mid-October. But I really don't see so much of a lull, and I've killed a lot of bucks in that time frame because I'm hunting close to bedding.
Yeah.
I think that if you're hunting away from bedding and you're hunting food plots and alfalfa fields and bean fields and stuff like that, yeah, you're going to see a lull in October, in early October. But if you're hunting where you're supposed to be, you don't see a lull.
Yeah, I don't think that well, I think it can exist for two reasons. One is pressure changing things that, hey, I've been seeing this for months. This deer's been on my camera, and then all of a sudden he's not. Well, I think two things that I've come to observe will dictate that. One, pressure will change where they are and where they're going. And two, obviously, above average temperatures. Deer, they just typically don't want to move once they have their winter coat on, and if it's above average temperature, right?
Yeah, I think there's whatever is causing, and those might be the causes, there is a timing thing where they don't move as far from bedding in daylight in that early October time frame as they do during the pre-rut, or they do during September when they're in their summer patterns. But they still move. And by creeping into that safe zone staging area type area, you're still seeing bucks in daylight.
Right.
I think in Michigan we see it quite a bit because our season opens October 1st, so
you get the pressure on top of it.
We get all the increased pressure right then. The foliage is starting to change, so some area, not as much right at the beginning of October, but towards the middle, there's some foliage is starting to change. So some areas that did seem a lot thicker to them are starting to thin out.
So you're calling that mid-October the lull? Okay.
Well, for me, what I would see is from October 5th to the 15th or so.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that.
And plus food sources can change a little in that time too for them,
I think actually the mid-October time frame is a really, really good time to hunt.
I've shot a few bucks in the 15 to 23rd time frame.
When you talk about rut activity, that gets a little sporadic and hard to predict. But when they just first start getting frisky in that mid-October time frame, and you're hunting bedding, a lot of times where two bedding areas are close to each other, they put a scrape right in between them, and men are deadly. Those bucks just race to that scrape before dark, and I've had a lot of action at that time frame. But you have to get on the right spots, But that mid-October, and it's kind of funny because I've had people comment on bucks I've shot at that time frame about, he shot a buck in a supposed lull. That ain't the lull to me. That's like a little bit of the pre-rut mid-October.
Yeah, I think I heard, and I think this was down in Texas, so it might not be replicated everywhere, but I think they radio collared quite a few whitetail bucks for a couple years, and when the data came back, all through October, their actual daytime activity slowly increased. There was never a dip.
A lull,
Yeah, they'd only showed.
Did they start in September?
I think that the bucks were actually radio collared for a couple of years.
Okay.
And then they spoke specifically on the lull, that there was through the month of October, moving into the rut, activity only increased.
See, but that would go along with what I'm saying is because
Right.
if you got really good movement in September, it had to go down to get to early October, and then it goes up to get to the end of October, right? I'm not saying the hunting's bad. I'm just saying that I think there's a slower period right at the very beginning of October, and probably like you said, the 5th to the 15th, but you're seeing an increase as it gets to that middle of the October to the end of the October, and I really can't say that there's a lull because I'm shooting deer during that time frame.
Right.
But I'm certainly not seeing them on the edge of hay fields and bean fields and stuff. And maybe more than to call it a lull, to just say you have to really, maybe you have to adapt your hunting methods.
Yeah,
Right.
that's what I've noticed. Like you kind of got to change where you're looking,
Right.
you know.
Right.
And I've noticed it seems like some of those older age class bucks are the ones, like the two I've shot have both been over scrapes, like you were saying, or near scrapes that just popped up within a day or two, along with, a bunch of rubs and stuff like that right there in the area. And they had just popped up, within a few days of it. And
Yeah.
where I think the younger bucks might start a little bit after, because I feel like the older bucks might be trying to get those first, does, because they have the experience, and then they, might be looking for the first does that are coming in. So I'm pretty sure I've heard that does will come into heat from like the 20th of October through the end of November, anywhere in that time frame. So
What's if you had to pick your favorite time, like your favorite couple weeks of the season, where like that you feel that, if somebody gave you and said, "Hey Dan, you can only take 1 week off work this hunting season," well, you'd probably quit. You'd probably switch jobs, knowing you. But
Yeah.
say in that
Probably
scenario,
the last 2 weeks of October.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that time frame. I mean, a guy might do real well in early November too, but it's a little more sporadic, a little harder to predict a certain buck's actions. It's a little more luck. I think October you can still use the rut to your advantage a little bit, but still pattern them.
Yeah, and it's possible too. The longer that you wait, the more opportunity other people have to take those deer too, right?
I mean, I had to hesitate there for a little bit because I really liked the opening couple of weeks too. The last few years I haven't killed nothing towards the opener, but when I was more in tune with the glassing and shining and stuff, which I don't do as much as I should anymore. As I'm getting older, I don't care as much. I have more of a reason to roll back over and go back to bed. But when I scout heavy and I do the work and such, opening week was always really good for me. I mean, I've killed a lot of big bucks opening day. But remember, we open a different time frame than you.
yeah,
And
Right.
the difference between October 1st and September 15th or whatever we open on is a world of difference.
Yeah.
yeah. You can just see it in driving by fields in Michigan, just in that September time. The beginning of September, you see deer out all the time. By the time end of September comes around, you're not seeing many out in the fields.
Yeah, if they would even just push us up 2 weeks and open us up on the 1st, you'd see a hell of a lot more big bucks get killed.
Yeah.
And even if you look at our record books, we've taken some really big bucks in that early September time frame.
Yeah.
We're gonna start getting wrapped up, but one of the last things that I wanted to ask you, and you had just mentioned about, it does take a lot of effort to get out of bed and do those things, and over the years you've put a ton of time and sacrifice. What is the ultimate factor that motivates you and drives you to hunt and to do it? Because it's a lot of time and it's a lot of work.
Anymore, at this time in my life, I think it's more of it's just why I'm alive. I'm a predator. When I was younger, I think it was to impress people. I think it was to gloat a little bit. And that might sound bad, but I think everybody goes through that. I think anybody who's a trophy hunter was a little bit about themselves when they began. And I think we go through stages as a hunter. And the stage I'm at right now, I'm just a predator. It's a way of life. It's just
So
who I am.
So it's changed over the years.
It does for everybody.
Motivating
It
factors.
does for everybody. Everybody who's a hunter, and some go through it faster than others. Like yourself, I look at you and I hear you talk. I can see that you've matured as a hunter, probably a lot faster than I did. When I was your age, I was a greedy bastard who wanted to kill everything he saw. And I think that that killer in me, and that really wanting to succeed and be somebody in hunting and stuff is what, as a young man, is what built me as a hunter now. And even though I was probably a worse person back then, it's made me a better person now looking back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love the idea of targeting mature animals and going through that chess match, but I also, man, I love shooting deer.
Yeah.
And I think it's what you just said. It's a predatory instinct. I mean, my family lives off venison, and so you know,
when it comes to big bucks, the guy's got to want it. He's got to want it bad. And if you're out there just like, well, this seems like a good hobby, I think I'd like to shoot big bucks. I don't think that's going to work out for you.
No.
Right.
It's something you really have to put your life into to be successful for. And anybody who's shooting big bucks who's knocking me for what I just said, you know, they're lying, because they were there too. Everybody was.
Right.
You gotta want it so bad that you make it happen, because you gotta push that envelope. You gotta crawl out of bed in the middle of the night. You gotta work hard. I mean, there's less than 0.1% of people in this United States would work that hard for their job, is what I work to kill bucks.
Right. Let alone their
Yeah.
hobby.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Dan, I got one last question. Do you feel like the Hunting Beast and your videos and teaching people, about your tactics and trying to make people better has made you a better person as a hunter, has made you a better?
That's a catch-22. I think it's helped me. And I've certainly learned some things from some of the people that I deal with, especially on the website and stuff, and the people I've talked with and met. I think have influenced my life greatly, yeah. But I think I'm a worse hunter for what I'm killing, if you want to call it that. I'm not killing as big a bucks as I should be, because I'm putting more effort into my website, more effort into my YouTube videos, more effort into the videos I'm making that I sell, than I am in scouting.
Yeah.
I think if I didn't have that website and if I wasn't editing videos all day long, I would be out glassing deer. I'd be out shining deer. I'd be out scouting. I'd be out on foot, and I'd be killing a lot better stuff.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Instead, I'm doing that for other people.
Yeah.
I go look at somebody else's property, show them what to do, and they kill the buck, and I slap them on the back.
Yeah.
But I'm at a point in my life where I don't really care.
Yeah.
I don't care if I kill another buck. I don't think it matters.
Yeah.
I don't think you or anybody else will think any less of me if I don't kill a big buck this year.
No, I'm pretty sure you've proven yourself.
And somehow, I've ended up killing a big buck every year since the late 80s, except for 1 year.
Yeah, that's incredible.
At least one.
Yeah.
Was that kind of your final? You got anything else you want to?
That was the last thing I wanted to pick Dan's brain about.
You got anything else that you want to touch on before we
Before we go
up?
chase more bears around?
Yeah, we got a truckload of bear bait to still go unload.
He's probably saved the longest hikes for last.
No,
I'm enjoying
it gets better.
I'm enjoying the hell out of it, man. We can do this all day long.
Yeah.
The last thing that I want to say is thank you. One, for taking the time to do this with us today, and two, for all the work that you have done over the years and what you've provided to the outdoor community. Myself, as a young, impressionable hunter, I watched a lot of deer hunting TV. I bought a lot of deer hunting magazines. I bought a lot of products. None of them ever made me a better deer hunter. They may have helped a little bit, but to be honest with you, a lot of it set me back. a lot of it pointed me in the wrong direction as a young impressionable hunter looking for that person to look up to. I chased a lot of that stuff, and once I came across your content and following your work, I had, direct results. And you've put a lot of work in to share this, and you've been very unselfish with it and very open with the whole hunting community. And I just want to say thank you, because I think you're a big asset to the entire deer hunting community. And I'm glad to call you a friend, and I think you're a good person that young, old, and any deer hunters and sportsmen alike can look up to. So
No, I appreciate that. And anytime you're dealing with somebody in the hunting community, believe it or not, they appreciate those words a lot more than you think, because you kind of get to the point where you start dwelling on the negative. You wouldn't believe how many negative comments I get.
I get it.
And it's good to hear from people like yourself that do care about what I'm doing and do appreciate it.
Yeah, the hunting community can be a tough one, and let's just say social media nowadays in general, people can really focus on the negative. But no, I think you're a very valuable asset to the outdoor community, and I just want to say
well, right
thanks.
back at you. I mean, the discussions with you and stuff, and talking about your beliefs and where you're going and looking at what you're doing. I really like what you're doing too. I mean, I think you're a stand-up guy who's in it for the right reasons, and that's not the norm nowadays.
Yeah.
But that's probably why we're joined together, is because you and I have similar beliefs. I think that's how we got together today.
And that's why we brought Alex too.
Yeah.
He's been following you for way longer than he
like-
knew about you.
Yeah.
I didn't do a lot of reading deer hunting content when I was younger. I was more of a picture looker. And this guy had read all your stuff for years. So when I found out that we were going to hook up and we were going to do this, I was happy to extend the invite to him, because
Yeah, I like Alex too. I just I don't trust anybody that messes with people when they sleep.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Yeah, I can say thank you, Dan, and that thank you comes from not only me, but the countless friends that, I've introduced to your stuff, my father, I mean, countless people, and they've all taken something from it. They've all learned from it. So, I mean, if they were all here, they would thank you just the same as me.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys.
Absolutely. So what if anybody listening to this doesn't currently follow along with the hunting beast? Well, what's the easiest way to tell them where to go to find you?
The Hunting Beast forum, it was thehuntingbeast.com, or they can just Google my name. And the YouTube videos are pretty awesome. I mean, I do got some goofy ones on there that are funny, but if you filter through them, there's some good stuff in there too. Especially if you look at the lists, the extreme whitetail tactics videos are really good. And what they do is they feature a hunt, and they feature the scouting, the tactics, and why the deer was killed and how, instead of dwelling on the actual kill. Those videos are really cool, and they'll give them a really good idea of what I'm doing. My DVDs are awesome, but I don't want to push them down people's throats. If you like what you see in those extreme whitetail tactics videos, you'll really like my videos. They're not for everybody, because they're about what we're talking here, the hard work. They're about how to do it. They're the mythology of to get to the point of where I'm at. So I don't want to push those down anybody's throat, but they're really cool videos. And if you're into the type of hunting we're doing, you'd like them. But I would suggest that first you watch those videos on YouTube and decide if you like that kind of video.
For anybody listening to this, I will have a blog post up at deerhunterpodcast.com, and I will include all those links to all that content.
Appreciate it. You can I gave you some videos to take home and watch, and
Yep.
share with a mutual friend we
I
have.
can't wait. We're going to put them on in the podcast studio. We're going to have some guys over this week to do a couple podcasts, and we'll have a couple beers and watch those videos, and
Cool.
we'll talk. We'll probably do some talking about them. So
You also have a book, don't you, Dan? Or is it
Yeah. The book isn't as popular, and probably because
I enjoyed it.
I do. It's kind of like the Extreme Whitetail Tactics videos where I break down a hunt,
Mm-hmm.
basically story after story of broken down hunts.
Yep.
And some of them are funny and some of them are serious.
Yep.
But yeah, I haven't gotten any negative feedback about them.
Yeah.
I just don't sell a million of them.
Yeah. Yep.
The book is available on Amazon.com or on my website.
Okay. All right.
On my website for a limited time because I've only got so many of the hard copies left, and then they'll just be on Amazon.
Oh, okay. All right.
well, it's probably time to wrap this up. I've been soaking wet from my toes up to my knees, and I feel like I'm starting to dry out. So we better go cruise through
Yeah.
some swamps and throw some
You
more
haven't even
bear bait
been
out.
you haven't even been chased by a bear yet. We got some work to do.
Okay. Thanks again, Dan. I
Yeah.
greatly appreciate it, and hopefully in the future again we'll get to do this again.
Yeah, hopefully if you ever get back this way or I get over your way.